Good afternoon and welcome to Have We Got Planning News for You. Thank you very much indeed for both our live viewers watching now and those catching up on YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Can I remind you all to consider making a donation to charity in lieu of a registration fee? The charities we support are listed on our website, havewegotplanningNewsForYou.com. And we are delighted this evening to welcome as our special guest, Master Planner Extraordinaire, Jason Pryor Partners. Jason, where are you calling us from? What are you drinking? And if you've chosen the theme, if you've got a theme, what have you chosen for that?
I'm calling you from Farringdon in London. I'm drinking apple juice, and my theme is looking forward to heading up to the west coast of Scotland tomorrow. So trying to get everything packed away so I can get going.
Very nice, very nice. That's a lovely part of the world. Well, we're delighted to have you with us today, and Paul's going to be leading the discussion with you in the second half of the show. As we always say to our guests, please do contribute to any of the discussion we had before then. If any of the cases or news reports excite your interest, but equally no obligation to do so. And Sasha, how are you? Very nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Charlie. I'm not far from Jason, probably about half a mile. I'm on Fleet Street and I am drinking tea. And I'm probably the first person to attend the Land Promoters and Developers Forum lunch and stay sober.
I'm on the Diet Coke. We're all very abstemious today. Yeah. Paul, are you drinking some crazy beer or not? Tea, Yorkshire tea, of course.
Yeah, tragically.
What else? How are you doing?
I'm fine. This is where you find me. I'm actually not a million miles away from you. So I'm in a Hilton Doubletree hotel in Boreham Wood. So I'm living the high life at the moment. Drinking the tea, and obviously Jason's told us what the theme is. So I'm afraid that there is literally nothing Scottish in my room apart from about 20% of me. So, Jason, looking forward to having a chat later.
And Chris, how are you doing, mate?
I'm very well, Charlie. Thank you very much. I'm half a mile down the road from Sasha, which puts me a mile down the road from Jason. I'm on the Strand in Chambers. I've been having conferences all day. I didn't go to the Land Promoters, though I saw, my goodness me, 70 tables and 700 people. Wow, has that organisation grown? Well done, Paul Brocklehurst and Phil Bamford and everybody involved in that. And I am drinking aloe vera because there's a sushi place opposite, and I'm running out of steam. I couldn't do a drink.
And Thea, in perfect timing. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Where's my go?
Where's your go? Yeah, exactly. Kind of literally perfect. Exactly. Reverse the order and you came in on demand.
Good.
You'd say.
Yeah, good. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I've just come out of cross-examining a landscape witness in Leeds. So that's where I am today. Lovely and sunny and delightful city. Oh, yeah. Nice one. So yeah, all good, bit fraught. Just had to find myself a room. So anyway, hello, good evening.
Very good to see you. Very good to see you. I'm going up to Leeds for the weekend break with my mum in a couple of weeks' time. It's a Saltaire, somewhere I always want to see. David honest. Yep, so good. Well, let's hear the news. Sasha, you're going to tell us about the news.
I am going to tell you about the news, and I've got 7 items I want to talk about. The first is, of course, I need to thank Chris for this, but of course, for those only beady-eyed viewers, on Wednesday, I think government announced a significant boost to the provision of social and affordable housing with an extra £2 billion in the budget in the next 3 years. So that will provide, they estimate that will allow delivery of between 16 and 18,000 new affordable and social housing. So that's pretty significant. The second thing, and for some of our viewers who are looking for career change, I thought it was incumbent upon me to announce that it probably is relevant for some of our viewers that the planning inspector is undertaking a recruitment drive. So anyone flirting with the thought of being a planning inspector, you have till the 4th of April to submit your application. And it's also noteworthy, and one of your themes, Charlie, and certainly mine, is a concern about how they're going to deal with a flood of examinations necessary. It's noteworthy that they've announced that they are going to carry out a recruitment process for both national infrastructure inspectors, but also, more pertinently, local plan examination inspectors. So I think Richard Schofield and his colleagues are thinking about recruitment, which is a good sign, so we can deal with all the work that is coming on stream in the next 2 to 3 years. The third matter I wanted to raise, and I think we'll deal with it as a case in a couple of weeks, but it's just worth flagging up the Supreme Court's decision in the Tower Hamlets case and Save Spitalfields, and the issue of councillors and to what extent they can join the debate, so to speak, when an application has been deferred. And it, of course, depends on the standing orders, but anyone involved in the administration of decisions should read the Supreme Court's decision. But I think it's of such magnitude, Charlie, that we will have it as one of our cases in 2 weeks' time. But I just wanted to flag up its existence. Fourthly, I wanted to mention Rachel Reeves' statement yesterday when I think there are two takeaways. There can be no doubt at how the government perceives planning as a material element in the search for growth in our economy. And when one listened to the speech, as I did, planning is very much in our Chancellor's mind. That's point one. Point two is the decision or the judgment of the Office of Fiscal Responsibility or Budgetary Responsibility about delivery, and their estimate that what the government will actually get home in the next 5 years is 1.3 million homes, not 1.5 million homes. Obviously, that is dealing with a forecast, and whether it will be right or not, we will see in the interest of time. I just wanted to also talk about a couple of, three local authorities. The first is Stafford, quite near you and Chris's historic location, and Thea, actually. But Paul, we've got a blooming West Midlands bias that we need.
Midland majority now, haven't we?
No. But Stafford Borough Council have voted to stop work on its emerging plan. I think that's material, so that's stopped in the tracks. The other local plan I wanted to raise, and Chris knows this, having gone to the EIP, and I was involved in a matter relating to it, is the inspector's pretty serious criticism of Christchurch, Poole and Bournemouth's emerging plan. We don't know what their response is, but I think anyone who's interested in the duty to cooperate, that is a very powerful expression of what needs to be done in order to comply with that legal requirement. And the last point I wanted to raise was about Bromsgrove Council, again, back to the West Midlands. And that is their moratorium on advising on grey belt, pre-advice on grey belt, until they receive what they say is clarification from the government, which is a bit peculiar in the light of the PPG changes that emerged not very long ago. But it's an interesting approach to impose a moratorium on pre-application advice. So, Charlie, that is my news update. And next time I'll bring Trevor McDonald along.
Thanks, Sasha. And Thea, out of the frying pan into the fire. Over to you for a case concerning Chris's home borough, Cheltenham.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a slightly unusual case, all about whether or not the prior approval was required for a 15-metre high mobile phone mast in Cheltenham in the central conservation area. And the council said prior approval was not required, but Mr. Thomas and others who lived nearby were concerned about the effect of exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields, or EMFs, on medical implants such as pacemakers and hearing aids. And this is some really niche stuff, isn't it? They wrote to the planning officer expressing their concerns, and the planning officer in his report referred to what is now paragraph 123 of the framework. And he said that the application should be determined on planning grounds only, and that the information submitted by the applicant showed conformity with the relevant guidelines issued by the International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiation Protection, those regulations with which we're also familiar, and that local planning authorities should not set health safeguards different from the International Commission guidelines for that public exposure. So Mr. Thomas complained to the High Court, and in the words of Lady Justice Andrews, he won the battle but not the war, because his point was that the guidelines didn't consider the issue of interference by EMF with medical implants. And the judge accepted that and said that the officer had failed to grapple with it. But the judge also found that the outcome would not have been substantially different had the officer gone about things in the right manner. And so he refused to quash the decision applying Section 31(2)(a) of the Senior Courts Act 1981. And that was because there was no evidence to support the complaints of Mr. Thomas and others. Now, the council was concerned, even though they'd won the war, that the judgment might be interpreted as laying down a general principle that the potential impact of EMFs on medical implants is a material consideration, in the sense that no rational decision maker could properly leave it out of account. And so it appealed, despite winning the war. And that's because the way in which the order was written, as you'll see on screen, and there are circumstances in which a woman can appeal, although it's unusual and difficult. In this case, the council's concerns were regarded as legitimate, that actually it could be taken to mean that in all cases, the decision to aid regard to this matter, regardless of the evidence before them. I would say the case essentially turned on what is and isn't a material consideration and what should be treated. At paragraph 24, the judge explained that there are three broad categories of information. First is information which is statute policy explicitly or implicitly requires a decision to consider. Second, the information which is statute or policy expressly or implicitly requires a decision, even if it might otherwise be relevant. And thirdly, information to which the decision taker may have regard, if in his or her judgment and discretion they think it's right to do so. Now, if the information falls in the third category, the decision taker can decide for himself or herself whether to take it into account and what weight to be ascribed to it. And that judgment, as we know, can only then be challenged on the basis of irrationality, which is a really high threshold. The Court of Appeal, in hearing the case, considered that the judgment below might have been open to misinterpretation, but what the judge was really saying on this fascinating issue was that the case officer should have appreciated that the guidelines didn't address the potential harmful impact in question, and whether in the circumstances of this particular application, the specific concern expressed about the impact on medical implants was a consideration in the evaluation of whether prior approval should be required. So, in other words, instead of believing himself obliged to disregard the material before him because of a misreading of the framework, the officer should have appreciated that he had a choice, and that choice was whether to take the matter into account in the determination to recommend prior approval. So it was that third category information. The Court of Appeal found the judge below did not find the potential impact of EMF on pacemakers or other implants was material, even in the circumstances of the specific case, let alone that it would always be a material consideration in applications of that nature. The officer went wrong because he thought he couldn't consider it. So the appeal was dismissed, but the council got the judgment they wanted in any event.
Thank you very much, Thea. I'm going to go next, and I'm going to tell you about a judicial review, or statutory review, I should say, brought by the National Farmers Union, the NFU, against Herefordshire Council in relation to their minerals and waste local plan. Now, I should preface this with the following remarks. Every Saturday during the series of Have We Got Planning News for You, Paul, Thea, Chris and I get an email from Sasha with the script. And never has the phrase, you win some, you lose some, been more apt, because this Saturday I noted that I got a case about chicken manure and waste law. And when I read the judgment, it soon became apparent that the judgment was almost impossible to decipher, still harder to explain to you, and of almost no relevance at all to anything that any of you will do. So I shall be brief. I still don't completely understand the judgment, if I'm entirely honest. But in essence, the challenge was to a policy in this minerals and waste local plan which sought to regulate agricultural waste management, in particular in relation to chicken manure, specifically because of concern about its impact on the phosphate and nutrient concentration in rivers and its contribution to nutrient neutrality. The claimants contended for a variety of entirely technical grounds, which, as I said, are almost no relevance to anything that any of you are watching how I will be doing, unless you are into chicken manure and waste, in which case my commiserations. But they essentially said this was overreach, and that the that the policy went further than European environmental law on waste. It's really that bad. And also that it went further than naturally been required. Anyway, Chris, you're making me have the giggles. This is almost as bad as Paul being in the back of a cab. Mrs. Justice Lever decided that there had been no overreach and that it was entirely lawful. But there is actually, or joking aside, there is actually one quite important point here, which is that Herefordshire County Council had taken it upon themselves to be proactive in regulating farming activities so as to mitigate the effects of nutrient pollution from farming and thereby create headroom for additional housing. And that's not a legal issue so much as really a planning factual issue that was the background of this case. And I say to that, hats off to them. Would that more local authorities would do the same thing. I personally think it's regrettable the National Farmers Union sought to challenge that policy. I'm pleased that Mr. Justice Leven dismissed the claim because certainly there are a lot of people in the housing and development sector who would have the legitimate view, in my opinion, that the nutrient neutrality issue is far more a problem for the agricultural sector and indeed the water sector than it is for the farming sector, and that it's a little bit odd that nutrient neutrality has meant in practice is that farmers get paid by developers to stop polluting activities that arguably they shouldn't be doing in the first place. So well done, Herefordshire Council. Well done to all the lawyers who, and indeed Mrs. Justice Leven, who put up with, I think it was 2 days of discussion on this thrilling subject. And thank you very much, Sasha, for giving me such a wonderful pick. Maybe I'll do better next time. So with that, I shall now pass on to Chris, who's going to talk about a far more interesting case. But I would say that, wouldn't I, Chris?
You would say that, and I would just say this, that Simon Wilkins put a message that chicken manure is excellent for growing courgettes, and I'm afraid that just set me off. So I'm really sorry about that last thing. I just thought that was a rather brilliant comment. Thank you, Simon. And other people saying, yeah, the River Wye has been destroyed by chicken farming. And so I agree with you. I think absolutely the case, the authority doing the right thing there. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about a appeal in Yatton, which involves flood risk. Now, you won't have heard of this case or know anything about it if you've been on the moon. But for everybody else, you almost certainly will have heard of it. It's Charlie's most popular post ever, I think. And Charlie, whenever he wins a case, sends us a text and he says, "This is massive." And that's often if it's just for a lawful development certificate appeal or something like that. But in this case, it really is massive. This is a hugely significant case which Charlie has won. As you can see, it's 190 homes, 50% affordable housing. Is it in the Greenbelt, you ask? No, it's just that Persimmon took the view that the challenges in the case meant that they ought to provide 20% more affordable housing than was otherwise the case. And this case won on the overall balance, despite, big drum roll, despite the fact it failed the sequential test. The inspector said it fails the sequential test, which we'll come on to in a moment, but despite that, grants planning permission. And that is a hugely significant issue because all of us advise at least several times a week on flood risk and sequential testing. And goodness me, why can the government not recognise that surface water can be dealt with by internal drainage systems? But anyway, this one was about tidal flooding because it's in North Somerset near to the Severn Estuary and the Irish Sea. And a large part of the proposal was actually open space. 70% of the gross area was given up to open space. And Charlie thought that would help with a sequential test because he thought, well, we'll have to look for a similar size site. But the inspector was not convinced by that. He thought the site could be disaggregated, which we know is also the case. Throughout the case, quite interestingly, the inspector refers to the Mead judgments and the arguments in Mead, and where they were unsuccessful in Mead, he relies upon the judgment in Mead to say that's the case. So, for example, Persimmon were arguing that it was necessary to look at whether the site was available to Persimmon. If it was in the hands of another developer, like Bloor or anybody else, then it wasn't available and it wasn't sequentially preferable. And again, following Mead, the inspector rejected that argument. But I want to deal, first of all, with paragraph 12, because in paragraph 12, we see that on day 3 of the inquiry, it emerged that a position statement submitted by the Environment Agency had only just come to the attention of Charlie's clients. The EAPS related to the third main issue, namely whether the proposal would increase the risk of flooding on neighbouring properties. And in order to ensure the evidence on flood risk could be properly examined and to avoid procedural unfairness, it was agreed that the evidence on flood risk should be given later in the inquiry. And that's highly significant, I think, that effectively that was not known and not provided to the appellants until the third day of the inquiry. How on earth did that happen? Next to paragraph 64, and paragraph 64 is the inspector's conclusion on the sequential test. He was primarily concerned with the tidal flooding, and he says, I conclude there are 12 sites that are sequentially preferable to the appeal site, and therefore you'd expect the next words to be, therefore I dismiss the appeal, but capable of accommodating the type of development and with a reasonable prospect that they would be available to be developed at the point in the future. So rejecting arguments about size and rejecting arguments about whether Persimmon could actually get hold of the site. There's one further site he refers to at Backwell, where I've just done an appeal, and that would be relevant as well. And therefore, the proposal does not pass the sequential test and is in conflict with local plan policy CS3. Now, that was, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, by my learned friend, Lord Banner, but that, I think, was in relation to the tidal flooding. Land raising was involved, and making sure all the houses on the site were acceptable. And, of course, there may be an effect on surrounding properties, but it was such a de minimis, tiny increase. And actually, if there was a breach of the flood defences, then those properties would be affected anyway. So the inspector rejected that, even though there would be a very, very sort of mathematically small increase of flood risk to neighbouring properties. If we go to paragraph 100, this is how the inspector dealt with the fluvial and the surface water. So 2 other types of flooding. We now know, don't we, the PPG, we have to deal with all types. The proposal includes a sustainable drainage system with detention basins to retain the surface water so that it did not discharge into the Rhine network, that's a series of gullies, at a controlled rate. The detention rates would be lined to prevent the ingress of groundwater. Development and land raising would be set back from the Rhine such that there would be an area that could take water if they were to overflow. So having decided that it failed the sequential test, his approach on the flood, on the tidal, he took the view that the surface water and the fluvial water could be dealt with within the site, which I have to say is a very pragmatic approach. Paragraph 101 next. The information has been reviewed by the council as local lead flood authority and the local highway authority. This is the fluvial and this is the surface water, and by the EA insofar as it's within their remit. Neither the council nor the EA have raised any objection in terms of fluvial or surface water flooding, subject to satisfactory detailed design of the surface water drainage system, which could be controlled by conditions. I consider the risks of other form of flooding have been properly assessed and should be managed and appropriate. Wouldn't that be a great conclusion on all sites? That if the EA and the local lead flood authority didn't object, then you didn't need to deal with it any further because there's no actual flood risk. That's because you've engineered the solution. Okay, next paragraph 104. I conclude, he says, overall, the proposed housing would be safe from flooding during the lifetime of development. The proposed means of access from the south, which could be secured by condition, would provide a safe route to and from the site during flood event. The proposal would not increase the risk of flooding elsewhere, only very tiny mathematical increase, and there would be residual risks from a possible breach of the existing defences or overtopping in an extreme event. These risks would be mitigated by the proposed FMP, which could be secured by condition. Climate change above the higher central CCA prediction is also a form of residual risk. It could be addressed by the provision of freeboard. I mean, wouldn't this be great if this is what the PPG said, effectively, that if there's a technical solution, then there's no problem. This is all in the context of having failed the sequential test. I'm only a quarter of the way through, by the way. This is a very long and very lengthy explanation. But if you are considering the issue of the sequential test and flooding, this is absolutely essential reading. It is surprising for Charlie, genuinely massive. And then paragraph 181. 187, flood risk. The framework states the development should not be allocated or permitted if there's a reasonable available sites appropriate for the proposed development in areas of lower flood risk. And it's worth noting, I was there the other day in Portishead, that actually North Somerset's new plan proposes sites which are equally a flood risk, and the inspector took that into account. He says, as I found that there are such sites, sequentially preferable, the proposal does not accord with the framework in this regard. Nevertheless, I found that the wider sustainability benefits outweigh the flood risk. Amen to that. For this reason, I conclude the policies in the framework relating to areas of risk of flooding do not provide a strong reason, remember that wording, strong reason for refusing the proposed development. And then finally, please, we have paragraph 195. He effectively applied the tilted balance, and Persimmon won the appeal. Very well done to Charlie's team, obviously led by Lord Ban himself, although he doesn't call himself that at inquiries, which is very modest. He's just plain old Charlie Banner KC. And well done to Catherine Bentham and all the experts, but particularly your flood risk expert. So that's a long case, and those are just the highlights.
Too true. And the PPG, the government's response to the consultation on the NPPF said that there would be updated PPG shortly in relation to flood risk. Well, nearly 4 months on, we haven't yet got it. So answers on a postcard as to what shortly means, but watch this space. Maybe they will update the PPG informed by the outcome of those proceedings. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sasha Sasha, Paul. I'm losing my marbles. That's what we get when you talk about chicken manure. So, Paul, over to you to introduce our guest.
Yeah, you're losing your marbles because somebody's finally complimented you on something being massive, Charlie. Jason, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. You are a man of some eminence for a whole host of reasons, which I'll try and summarize. You're a chartered landscape architect by trade. You're currently the lead and co-founder of Pryor and Partners. You're an alumni of Manchester Met, which is, of course, a huge thing. You're the former chief exec of ACOM, past president of EDOR, and you've had notable involvement in some of the biggest regeneration and most important regeneration projects in the United Kingdom, certainly during my lifetime. And I highlight a couple, one of which is the replanning of Manchester City Centre following the appalling 1996 IRA bomb. And secondly, the planning of the 2012 Olympic Park. Wow. Your current firm is now employee-owned, which is great, and has a renowned international reputation, involved in planning and regeneration across the world, from Bhutan to the west coast of the United States. You know, it leaves out Hawaii, possibly. You've got over 100 professionals in a true multidisciplinary practice, and you won last year the King's Award for Enterprise for International Trade, which is the highest official award for British business. And you were also a recent winner of the RTPI Planning Consultancy of the Year. I think one of the most notable things, actually, is that you even have a photograph of yourself in the National Portrait Gallery, and not one you just took there on an Instamatic like Charlie has. And despite being a chartered architect, your reputation is founded primarily on your experience and your reputation as a master planner and urban designer. So, Jason, first of all, welcome. It's a great honor to have you on the show.
Thank
you.
So,
can I start off by just asking you to tell us a little bit about your professional journey from your perspective? How did you start, and what first drew you away from the role of a conventional landscape architect, boring as stupid with table after table of significance and sensitivities?
Well, it's probably that, actually. So I went to Manchester Met and the great city of Manchester, so that was fabulous. Bit of a wake-up call from somebody who was brought up in Oxfordshire. I went to Southern Africa for a while, did work there, came back to London, did the normal stuff of, city development, bits of landscape here and there, loved it. But ended up moving out of London to Swindon, where I worked for a firm that specialised in big quarries, hard rock and sand and gravel. It sounds a bit odd, but I was really into the idea of big landscape systems. And at the time, people were, quarrying out sea quarries, Scottish islands, you name it. It was all a bit mad. But anyway, did a few of those. And those clients, of course, started to look at what they were going to do with their redundant land. So people like Blue Circle in North Kent started to look at recycling land, landfill sites, restored quarries. So I got into the planning of those restoration land uses, I suppose. So that took me into urban design, master planning, and then I moved back up to London to set up the design studios for an American firm called Edor, who were a very large landscape practice out of California. And then in 95, started working in Manchester on the National Stadium, Olympic, whatever bid was going on at the time. Finally ended up as the Etihad Stadium. Met Howard Bernstein in the team there, and then there was the 96 bomb, as you said, Paul, and then it was obvious that we were being encouraged to put a team together. There were various people ringing up saying, "We're here, you're putting a team together," which was news to us. Anyway, we entered the competition, won it, and moved back in, really. I got an apartment back in Manchester, moved back in, and spent the next 4 years on that rather fast journey to restore the city centre. And then a lot of work for the URCs after that. Bob Kerslake at Sheffield, Jim Gill up in Liverpool. I think the big northern cities became the place we worked. Absolutely fantastic. Regeneration was what it was all about. And then you're right, 2003, the Olympics, and off we went again. And since then, set the firm up 5-6 years ago, and carried on doing the same thing, really.
Brilliant. Let me take you back to 1996. So at the time, I was sitting watching in Salford at a mate's house, Gaza with the most extraordinary goal, and then the world ended because of the big boom that we all heard. And certainly, I was called in as a key holder to King's Chambers on that evening for the Manchester bomb, which was one of the most sobering experiences of my life. For anybody who's based in Manchester, or anybody, as I have been professionally for the last 30 years of my professional career, or anybody who's lived and worked in Manchester in the last 25 years, the regeneration of St Anne's Square all the way through to the pubs at the end of the Cathedral Quarter heading over to Victoria is extraordinary. So what are the lessons that you've learned from that, both good and bad? What have you taken away from that you've brought to other projects, apart from everybody should live in Manchester?
Other than that, well, I think, there was the bomb, but also Manchester was in an incredibly fragile position at the time. I seem to remember Trafford, the big shopping centre that Peel had built was just into its letting programme, so we came in the sort of hollowing out of city centre retail. There's only actually a couple of hundred homes in the city centre at the time, most of them perched on the roof of the Arndale Centre, which is a bit odd. And so you had a deeply declining city centre. So I think what we learned was, don't rush to put it all back together again. And I think a lot of the thing the city was doing was buying time. The insurance companies really wanted to just patch it all up and get everyone back into their shops and stop paying sort of to keep shopkeepers out of their spaces. So the city bought time. We had time to think about what would look as a successful city centre into the future. And it gave us an opportunity to address a whole series of fairly fundamental problems with the city that have sort of accreted over the years. So I think the big lesson was look carefully at the place and be considerate in how you stitch things back together. Talk to a lot of people. Even though I'd been to college in Manchester, I wasn't a Mancunian, and therefore you need to talk to a lot of people. You're part of a bigger team. Regeneration is definitely a team game, and so there's a lot of voices to be heard. And then it was, I think that very careful working with the city's planning team, which was an amazing group of people, and were consistently all there for the next 20 years or so. I think we also learned that you can't be too careful. That there will always be quite serious conflicting agendas, and you need to be able to put yourself in the middle of that and have those conversations and take the heat out of things and get into the debate properly. But I think the overriding one for me, and I think part of the success of that project was, at the end of the day, it's all about people. If you can't get people back into your city centres, if you can't animate what's the point of a city without people? And a city that's dead after dark or is dead at weekends is just is not really a place anyone wants to be. A lot of antisocial behavior follows in. So giving people ownership of that space, choice, a sense of pride, and I mean, how many homes back in the city centre now? 10,000 or so. I mean, it became a place to live, and I think that's the secret to a lot of our cities, and actually a lot of the cities we work in around the world that have followed out as people have left to the burbs and the edges, and much of the mission we're on is getting people back into those city centres and defining what good city centre living looks like.
The bittersweet testimony that always struck me about the regeneration project that you'd successfully been part of was after the arena bombing, because before that project there was never really a city centre. There was never really a heart. Market Street was never the heart. St Anne's Square coming up to Harvey Nicks is now the heart of the city.
Yeah.
And so after the arena bombing, when the city of Manchester came together to say how heartbroken we all were, that's where the floral tribute was. That was the heart of the city. Anyway, so moving forward, having encountered the late Sir Howard, friend of the show, sadly missed in that project, you encountered him again when you were part of the bidding team for master planning of London 2012. Undoubtedly one of the most successful and high-profile regeneration projects in Europe in the 21st century. Why do you think a master planner was appointed in relation to your role and not an architect, one of the stars of the architectural world? How do you square regeneration objectives from your perspective compared to, I don't know, a star architect like Renzo Piano or someone like that?
Yeah, and it was odd, I hadn't realised what everyone else's pitch had been on the day until I went to the Royal Academy exhibition that summer and all their models were there. And I thought, oh, we missed a trick there. But, we went in with 3 drawings. It was pretty simple. We just said, look, here's a diagram of how this part of the East End of London should probably look and feel. So how do you stitch back together the boroughs either side of the River Lee? What does good look like? How do we restore the river systems, the natural systems, the canals? How do we link and bridge that were really quite disparate piece of the city? How do we bring these outer London boroughs connected to inner London? That was one drawing. Middle drawing was, this is how you could place an Olympic Games in the Lee Valley. This is the distribution of assets. And it was to do with walk distances from stations and all of those sort of things. And then the third drawing was, well, what if you put those 2 things on top of each other and make a big decision, which is there's a whole load of venues you will build for the games that you will not need afterwards. The UK doesn't need, you in Kazakhstan, you might build a 30,000 seater wrestling arena, but you're not going to do it here. There are different, we didn't need a permanent basketball arena because that's not the sport that's played here at that scale. So, and you don't need a swimming pool with 20,000 seats because after you've done the Olympics, you'll be lucky if 500 people turn up and they'll be mostly parents of the competitors. So, there are both intermediate states and final states that we can deal with. And actually, the most important thing here is the platform we then create to realize that first plan of rebuilding the city and realizing that potential. And that was really the pitch. And I think it was looking down the table and seeing a whole series of people we had worked on city regeneration for sitting down one side of the table and maybe people who were architecturally biased down the other. And it was just a question of, I suppose, who won the debate at the end of the day. And I suppose an argument that this was about big scale city planning and fantastic architecture would need to follow, but that wasn't the task at hand at that point.
Brilliant. Jason, I've got a couple more questions, but before I do, Charlie's got to go and carry the bags for somebody far more eminent than Charlie. So he needs to disappear. So I'm going to let Charlie interpose. And just to let you know about wrestling stadia in Kazakhstan, Charlie is also a Kazakhstan judge who's given a number of judgments. I won't tell you what outfit he's worn during that, but if you've seen the Borat film, it gives you an idea. Charlie, you have a question for Jason.
Thank you. I do, and it's on that international theme, Jason, because I was fascinated to read about your work there and indeed in the USA, Saudi Arabia, etc. And what I'm interested in your perspective on is, do you think the master planning is more or less successful in those other countries you worked in where the planning regulatory regime is different to the UK or in some cases non-existent? And what are the reasons for that? Any lessons we can learn here?
So I think wherever you do these larger master plans, you're working in an environment that just reflects the society you're in, and they all have their own ways of doing things. They all obviously produce successful outcomes. They all produce some terrible outcomes, some of them. The American system is very numbers driven, very prescriptive, well argued, lots of public consultation. You go to a vote. So it's a very different way of doing it. And we've had some considerable success over in California, sort of changing local plans, changing structure plans and getting new communities developed. You go to places like Saudi where you've got a much more centralized system running back up to approval at both sort of county, state level as well as the national level, but also a rapidly developing skill set. I mean, quite extraordinary cultural change going on. I would say one thing though that I see in our overseas work, and this maybe comes back to hopefully the evolution of our own planning system. It's a lot easier to use the technology, the data systems in those international projects than it is here. I mean, frankly, from a technology point of view, it's streets ahead elsewhere in the world. We are so far behind that we've got some major catching up to do. We can crunch data, put propositions out there, test ideas in ways that are really very difficult to do here. And quite often, the planning system is much better resourced. So that debate is faster, more intense. They're all different. They all represent societies that they're in. They all have great successes on the one hand, sometimes not so good. But the thing that really stands out to me is the speed of process and our ability to get things done. And, it can be great environments to work in.
Familiar themes, obviously, to which with recent headlines.
Going to solve soon.
Indeed. No, really interesting. Well, Jason, thank you very much. I apologize. I have to bow it to do something else or help somebody else. So I shall leave you in the capable hands of Paul and then Thea to close. But thank you very much indeed. Interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I've got a couple more questions, Jason, but can I pick up one from that follows on from what Charlie's just asked you, if I may? And that's, I think you told us when we had a chat earlier that although you've just done a recent inquiry with Sasha on a site in Marlow, that your previous inquiry was remarkably the CPO inquiry for the 2012 Olympics, where you worked with friend of the show, Richard Lloyd. I'm interested to know whether you think that the whole process that we operate in terms of that final stage of the planning process is too adversarial, where we've not got much opportunity for interaction. Should it be more iterative? Should we get inspectors? I mean, it's a heretical notion, but providing feedback on appeals in advance of a decision or suggesting tweaks. Have we got it wrong by taking this overly black letter law approach, do you think?
Yeah. Until I met Sasha, I'd spent 20 years trying to avoid your profession. So it's something personal. But look, I have to say from a personal point of view, it's not an experience I enjoy, although you're all lovely and charming. But, I think part of the problem is that a lot of these projects get very complex. They involve, doing some of these really big ones. They're years in the conceiving and making. They've got so many actors at the stage. They're going to be delivered over time periods which outlive any plan that's out there. I think when we did the Olympics, they said it would take 40 years to build it out afterwards. What it's done now, so it's gone pretty fast. But you're dealing with long time periods. You're dealing with a lot of complexity. You're dealing with a proposition on the table that admits from the get-go that it will probably have to mature and evolve against the background of evolving policy and markets and economies and things. So I sometimes wonder whether it's really even possible to kind of get everyone in a room for 2 or 3 weeks and have an inquiry about it. I was a CAME commissioner for a while for landscape, and we used to do design review on big projects. I went through a lot of it on things like the Olympics. And that process of interrogation and feedback by all the major agencies, I think would be hugely valuable for these big projects. That when we get to the end proposition, it's not a surprise to anyone. Everyone's been on the journey with you. And the fact that my sense is it wouldn't add a huge amount to the cost of the process when you consider the costs that are involved in this sort of sword of Damocles moment at the end. And having the lawyers and the planners at the table through that process, shaping the agreements and the propositions and weighing things in the balance, I think would be massively useful. But I do think that on some of these really big projects, that debate should be starting really early on. And the definitions about what success actually looks like, I think, need to be really drilled into.
So I'm tempted. I've got a whole host of questions I could ask you, Jason. For example, your role with Catriona Riddle on SDSs and strategic planning. There's a whole host of things I'd love to ask you, but I would like to finish my questions by the big one, which is you've been involved in such a wide range and an impressive range of projects over your professional career. What have been the standout career moments for you? And if you had your time again, what would you do differently? And if you say not go to Manchester, I'm afraid you and I will stop being friends.
Look, I think standouts were, I'll give you one. Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester. Stood in the middle. I was the landscape architect for that. We were stood in the. I was sitting in the gardens one day chatting to somebody about something, and then all the buses are going backwards and forwards. Bus pulls up. It's a poor part of the country. These assets are now starting to get used in different ways. But I watched this family get off a bus. So 2 toddlers, two deck chairs, and the parents were carrying all these bags. They set their deck chairs up next to the fountain in Piccadilly Gardens. Sort of picked up their toddlers, whipped the nappies off them, and then into the fountain they went. And the parents just sort of sat down in their deck chairs. And I just thought, job done, brilliant. We're right in the middle of the UK's second city, and parents are bringing out. Everyone does a Somerset House here and wherever, and it's all lovely and contained. But that was just, to me, I think, career highlight. If I had to do it all again, well, I wouldn't do this. I don't think I would have done this. So. I think, I don't know. I was once offered the chance to be a professional hang glider pilot in my late 20s. And that was the longest job offer I ever thought about. That tore me up, that one. I decided to stick with being sensible. But no, I think I should really be some leathery old mountain guy by now, or flying a bush plane in Alaska. That would have made me very happy, I think.
That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. Sasha, do you have a question for Jason?
I do. I can't think of anything worse than a professional hang glider as a serious vertigo sufferer. That would be going into a public inquiry for weeks and weeks and weeks is sheer joy compared to being a professional hang glider.
Less a horror story for me, I should say.
I know, but look, Jason, I've had an experience this week, and I won't comment on it too strongly because it's an outstanding appeal, but I was doing a brownfield site in Cornwall within the centre of a town for elderly persons accommodation, and I was greeted on the first morning of the inquiry by 150 very, very angry locals. Why in 2025 have we got a perception of development and change that is so pessimistic and frankly fearful of what development will bring? How have we so lost the debate, and how can we kind of shift the mechanics to a more positive embracing of development and change through the built environment?
Wow. Well, I think I would pick on 2 pieces. I think there's been, we have so many local authorities without plans. We have planning authorities that have been frankly eviscerated over the last 10, 20 years. So we have a lack of engagement between the planning process and the public, and we don't have the professionals in the middle there. So I think the public gets surprised by things. I think they find things happen to them that that haven't been broadcast or debated through the normal means. So I think, don't know the details of your one by any means, but I think sometimes you come upon situations where people feel they're having this done to them and they haven't had a way of even communicating those thoughts. I think politics has got into the system in a much more local way, in that it's an easy game to play, to rile people up around certain issues, pro or otherwise, for schemes. But I think when you throw social media into the mix, which is all about emotions, it's kind of developed this culture where you kind of fire first and ask questions later. And I think those sort of heady mixture of people uncertain about what's going on around them, easy to stoke an argument with social media. I was in a public meeting recently in a village near us where something's being proposed. And what struck me as being interesting is the scheme's not particularly clever. There are definitely issues with it. But actually, when everyone got in the room, the discussion was 75% of it was nothing to do with the scheme. It was about the holes in the road. It was about this. It was about that. So things become a lightning rod for a whole bunch of other issues that really don't do with, or even connected to the project at hand. So I think there's a very febrile atmosphere out there. And I would circle all the way back to, I think there's just an appalling lack of leadership in certain places. We haven't got the plans. We haven't got people standing up for good ideas. And we haven't got people who are prepared to, as it were, manage the public debate, which is very hard to do by the time you get to a public inquiry or whatever. That's not the place to have that stuff out. That should all been resolved long before. I remember on the Olympics, I think I did like 180 public meetings in the first year as we were trying to get people, and that was everything from big roomfuls to small groups to pubs. We learned more about what to do for that legacy scheme than we'd ever done by any other means. That was a great process. And what did we have? We have a huge amount of support in the end for an idea that was actually going to be highly disruptive. And the debate moved from Olympics to legacy to, well, what do my children get out of this? What does the future look like? And I think if you can engage with people, they deserve to be talked to, but they don't deserve to be talked to when it's kind of bolted up and are ready to run, as it were. I think you need to get in a lot earlier and get that debate going. And local leadership needs to own that.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Ash. Thea, do you have a question for Jason?
I do, yes. And hello, Jason. It's really good to meet you. Sorry for rushing in earlier and not saying a proper hello. I'm going international again with the next question. And it's about your fellow director, Jonathan Rose, because he's just been awarded the prestigious Druxy, the Order of the Beloved of the Thunder Dragon Medal by the King of Bhutan for services to the country, with recent work including his instrumental role in the newly adopted Thimphu Structure Plan, which is a framework for sustainable development in the country's rapidly urbanising capital city. And I wanted to know, please, how that came about. And importantly, should we be honouring our planners and master planners in a similar way as the lights go out in Leeds?
Well, Jonathan, our office did an amazing job on that project. And the way it came about was another person called Jonathan Rose. There were two of them. Actually, they both got the award on the same day. And Jonathan Rose from New York is a developer of sustainable, quite often community-led projects. If I remember rightly, Jonathan had come to Oxford to do a post-grad study and after a very successful development career, and wrote a book about how to humanize cities. That was read by the Bhutan government. So they invited Jonathan Rose from America over to give a lecture. He asked Johnny Rose from our office to go with him and not just do a lecture, but run a series of workshops about how do you address some very fundamental issues for that city in terms of rapid expansion, depopulation of the countryside, and of course very constrained by the physical environment that it's in. So that's when the project started, and it became about sustainable long-term development of the city. Kate Howard's work on donut economics was fed into that. So that set sort of rather nicely with the sort of the measures of national happiness that Bhutan has now been running for 40 or 50 years. And that kind of evolved with that donut economics proposition into a really finely wrought plan for the expansion of the city, going back to green building techniques, timber, recovering their own architectural and styles, and a finely crafted piece of work. It was a great opportunity here for the office. We had the young people in the office in Bhutan for 2 or 3 months at a time, and got to do a lot of the site work. So yeah, fabulous. And I think we'll be back there later this year, carrying on the work.
Is there a role for planning barristers to come along with you?
I'm sure 4 or 5 at any one time, I imagine.
Thanks, Thea. Chris, do you have a question for Jason?
I do. I just wanted to say your observation about a lack of local leadership is generating a lot of support. I think we all agree with that. There's just a complete lack of leadership and a complete unwillingness sometimes to just get on with what needs to be done. So you're absolutely spot on there. My question, really simple. What makes a place work?
People. You know, if you look at so many places we look at, I always think a big test is just go and walk through a city at 10 o'clock at night and see what's happening. Walk through anywhere just after dark, be it a wet February afternoon at 6:30 or in the middle of the week or whatever. If you can't see the lights on, if you can't see the people, if people have no reason to be there or are scared to be there, cities are cultural and economic and social engines. And actually, when any one of those 3 things isn't working, it tends not to work. So I think it's always for us a proposition about putting yourself in the place of people. Yeah, why would I be here? What am I going to do? Why would I find this interesting? Why would I bring my family up here? Why would I hang out here? Why would I shop here? And that's got an added edge to it now with, rapid change in retail habits, rapid change in workplace habits. There's great sea changes going on, which provide uncertainty. But at the end of the day, if you haven't got a really strong, powerful proposition to bring people in, I think and beyond that, we know that you can make some places which look architecturally awful, never look like they're going to work, but it's full of people and it's happening. And then you can create these great set pieces. I sometimes say to my architectural friends, no one's looking at the building, they're looking at where the door is, they're looking at the ground floor, and your work is magnificent, but who's going to engage with this place, this street? So a lot of our work starts from, and this might be harking back to being a landscape architect, but a lot of our work starts in the public realm and works back to the building, because again, public realm is that, the pluralistic space where everything happens, the bit that glues us all together. And, public space done well is often a big salvation for a lot of the places we work in.
I completely agree with you. I was blown away by Manchester. I spent a lot of time there for Places for Everybody, the spatial plan, and it's just extraordinary. There's actually 20,000 people, Dave Trimmingham has just reminded me, 20,000 people in the city centre, and it's just extraordinary. It really is for the third city in England.
Yeah, well, I think when you talk to the second city people, they would, you can't separate the spatial changes that were made from the cultural piece. So, you think of the theatre festival, the music festival, Pride, all of those things that are running there. There are a lot of people who own that city centre. They either live there or they're going to be there. It's multiple layers to attract people in and hold them and create pride and sense of ownership. And then all the other work that was done by those great leadership teams across the region to stitch it together with tram systems and bus systems and all of those. It's fabulous, but it goes back to the complexity, I suppose, of the city. I think cities are, mankind's sort of greatest creation. and have been for about the last 4,000 years. And,
Yeah.
and on the one hand, the design of those is kind of the easy bit. I mean, I take my hats off to people who manage cities. I mean, extraordinary task, and yeah, with very little thanks for it. But to keep that kind of engine running with all the pressures and contradictions in it is an extraordinary thing to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And obviously, for our viewers, the third city that Chris was referring to is after Leeds and York, just to be clear. I'm happy to hand over to Thea to wrap up. Thank you very much indeed, Jason. It's been an absolute privilege to have a conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason, for that. Really insightful. And if you never hear from me again, it's because I got lost somewhere in Leeds Civic Hall. Thank you all. Especially thanks to Inspector Prentice for being Player of the Week this week. Look forward to seeing you all next time. Thanks very much.